Blog Talk Radio.
Are you ready to take a bite out of the competition? Are you looking for ideas to make your business better? Welcome to the Core Business Show with Tim Jacquet, sponsored by Apple Capital Group. At the core of every successful business, you'll find people making a difference. And with each episode of the Core Business Show, we talk with those people, examine those ideas, and explore the strategies that make them special. Now, the host of the Core Business Show, Tim Jacquet.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Core Business Show. I'm Tim Jacquet, your host. Today, I have the pleasure of having another artist from the OCP, Jaime Cortez. We're going to talk about his music, his career, and his life. If you want to call in, you can call in at 347-324-3460, 347-324-3460. We'll post the question in the chat room, and I'll go ahead and read the question on the air. To begin with, I'm going to play one of his tunes. It's called Rain Down. It is a English language song, and we're going to play that, and we should have him on the air shortly. That was Children Reborn by Jaime Cortez. Jaime, welcome to the program.
Thanks a lot, Tim, and hello to all the listeners and Apple Capital Group, and good to be with you.
Great, thank you for joining us. I guess to begin with, kind of tell us about yourself and how did you get started?
Okay, I've been a musician for many years since I was very young, and loved to play music. But at some point in life, sometime in the early high school, and I started getting a little bit more directly involved with church liturgical music. And in college, a friend of mine took me to a wonderful place called the All Saints Catholic Newman Center, which is like a small Catholic church for the campus of the university. It was an Arizona State University. And I saw a lot of young people playing music. It was contemporary stuff, and it was very accessible. And I really felt excited about doing that and joined. And of course, I had a network of friends that did the same thing and had common interests. Some of those friends became now very well-known national names. You know, people like Tom Booth were there, Rory Cooney and Gary Daigle, really wonderful musicians from the church. So at the time, I started questioning, well, who organizes this and how do we choose music? And so wonderful men gave me the right resources and point me in the right direction to go attend conferences that would educate me in liturgy and in appropriate music for worship. And from there, I just kind of developed this skill and had an opportunity to establish a relationship with this wonderful company called OCP, or Publications. And as that relationship grew, there was a lot more to study and a lot more to learn. And that led me to study in much more depth what it meant to be a musician for the Catholic Church in the sense of doing appropriate music for worship, and develop my skills as an instrumentalist, as an arranger, as a composer. And those things have taken me to a lot of places where I can have the privilege of listening to great speakers and people that are top in their field in liturgy or in theology or in music, and rub elbows with terrific musicians that have taught me a lot. And so little by little, training on the field has given me the great gift of being able to be a successful music writer for the church.
Well, thank you. Hey, kind of tell us your story, how your music come to be. I mean, do you write in the middle of the night, or what inspires you to write your music?
That's really an interesting question, and I get that asked quite a bit. It's not always easy to pinpoint how you write music. Artistically speaking, inspiration comes from different things. It could a phrase could trigger it. A conversation with a friend could trigger it. A phrase in a scripture reading can trigger it. An action can trigger it. But the truth is that in the realm that we live, or at least that I live, which is a lot of times using music as a function. Music is a function that kind of glues together ritual actions in a church setting whenever you're doing liturgy, which is prayer, the common prayer of the community. When you're using music to glue that together and to heighten the consciousness of certain ritual actions through music, then it becomes a little bit more functional. And a lot of times, it's more of a test. It could be that somebody has said to me that they need music for the sacrament, or they need music for a particular ritual that has to do with welcoming new members into the church. Or maybe a friend of mine is getting married and needs a small acclamation for their wedding ceremony. And so these things are functional, where music will literally have a function within the ritual action to either heighten the consciousness, to deepen the level of faith or the experience that you're taking at the moment. So a lot of times, it's a functional test. It will be a matter of the inspiration comes from, we need a better song for the sacraments here, or we need a particular piece of music for this ritual moment. And I go do research. I looked at the general instructions and some of the scripture readings that are related to that moment in that ritual action, and that triggers something for me, and I just begin writing. Sometimes it could be with the text first, sometimes it could be with the music first, but normally with some sort of a task or a goal that is very specific, a function that is specific for a certain ritual action.
Talk about function with the change of the liturgy. I know from some writers, they're trying to take their old titles and trying to adapt to this new text. Some of them said they really have struggled. And even if you look at once they did get it to fit, then the people that was used to it, the musicians, directors, say, I really don't care about, because it brings a new psyche, and you play it for the directors, and you look at the faces on the directors. They said, why don't you just write something like this, but brand new? It is really, some of the stuff works, some of them don't work. Did you have to struggle with that? And when you kind to revise your editions, and how do you struggle with it?
Yeah, I think first of all, that's a very valid feeling that you articulated. And I think that you articulated a feeling that is incredibly common throughout the entire nation, in the sense that all of us have to pay sharper attention to the text, also understand that there are changes, and to be aware of that, to go and do research and say, okay, when we're going to do this particular ritual action, are there changes in this? And does the Roman Missal have already adapted this into a new or at least an updated version with a different language? And how are we going to deal with this? And how are we going to use music with this? Can we use the music that we have? So all the things that you articulated are very valid and also very real for the majority of the musicians of the nation. We just have to pay attention. And so I went through the same thing. You have to be really careful and going, okay, so we're doing this right now. Well, has this been updated? And the great majority of the liturgy has been updated, and you have to just kind of pay attention to that. So in some situations, we have to go piece by piece. If you're talking about mass settings, for example, which I think is where the sharper example of this is, the publishers decided, they looked at the mass settings and said, well, do we need to update this one? Can this mass setting, this musical setting of this mass, the Holy, the Memorial Acclamation, the Amen, which is now called just the Acclamation, by the way, are those pieces of music, can they be adapted and updated with a new language and the new translation? And then can we still use them? Would people feel confused? Or do we just do a new one? And they decided to go with both. And I think that most of the musicians in the church have also decided to go with both, with rare exceptions where the bishops have asked them not to. But in general, if you were talking about my particular case in my particular diocese, we were given permission to use the updated ones and also new ones. And so in my parish, I chose one mass setting that was going to be one of the updated ones. We would recognize the melody, and we would have to teach the new translation for it. And at the same time, we learned a new one, a new mass setting, and we took the time to learn it. I think the essential thing about that, in terms of you musicians of the church thinking in terms of being instrumental catechists, is how you teach this, how you teach it to the group of people who are coming, the faithful that come in. So it is crucial that you have to explain what's going on, that there have been some updates and some translations that are new, that you feel that maybe this is a setting of the Mass that is recognizable and it's familiar to the people. So we're going to try to use it with the new language. So let's practice this. And we give everybody an opportunity to practice it. There's a whole system. The musician of the church, if it's a successful person, is somebody who is really interested on helping a group of people, faithful, to help them to come and enter into the song so they can, in that way, enter more deeply into prayer, into a Christ experience. And so, with that, I have to have catechetical tools. I have to teach. I have to do it in a way that it will be accessible to everybody and positive to everybody. So it's a tricky thing. It's a difficult thing, but in a way, I have to make decisions as a leader of song and a leader of faith in my community. I'm going to teach something that is old and recognizable, yet a little updated, and also I'm going to teach something new to them, and I'm going to do it in a positive way so that we can work it out, so that we can all come out at the end happy and ready to.
Wow. So how long do you recommend to stay in the Mass setting?
Did you say how long?
Yeah, how long you recommend to stay in a mass setting of the new text?
That's
Year
really
or 6 months?
That's really interesting. That's a great question too. I love your questions, Tim. I think one of the important things is, who is your community? You need to know who is your community. How well do they adapt to changes? How well have you and the leadership of that church taught different things? For example, the liturgical year. The liturgical year is an important aspect of understanding your journey of faith through the scriptures when you are going to church. So if your community is well trained in understanding the liturgical year and understanding the different seasons of the church, then I use, in general, 4 mass settings, in general. And right now, because of the new changes, I've only gotten to 2 of them, and slowly we're going to be choosing more of those settings. But I use 1 setting for Advent and Christmas. I use 1 setting for the ordinary time parts. I use 1 setting for Lent and Easter together. And then I use 1 for sometimes maybe special occasions or something that has to do more with the diocesan level if we're going to do the cathedral. So there's something else. But in general, that I pair them up that way. I put Advent and Christmas together with 1 setting, Lent and Easter with 1 setting, and also 1 setting for ordinary. And so that's how I use it. And there's no rule for that. But now that we're doing new settings, I am much more inclined to be comfortable saying, well, we could use maybe 1 for the whole year, or maybe 1 for 6 months, so that people can get very familiar with it.
With the new text, kind of describe, with your particular music, is written a lot of bilingual and Spanish language songs. Then you have 2 songs that's really widely known, Rain Down. Tell us how that came to be, because it's more of a gospel flair and it's not more of the norm that you write. So tell us about that particular song.
Well, I guess that's if people who know me well know that I'm very eclectic. I was born in New York City, but my parents are from Central America, from El Salvador, and I actually grew up there and did my elementary school in El Salvador in Central America. So I have a lot of influences from a lot of places. If you know geographically where El Salvador is in Central America, it comes with great influence from Mexican music, but also great influences from the South American countries, which have completely different rhythms, merengue, and all kinds of different rhythms from Colombia, Venezuela, and from Brazil, and from Argentina, and the Caribbean, which is Afro-Cuban. And so that there's a lot of influences. So I have a lot of different musical patterns that I am familiar with. And one of the things is I grew up partially in the United States, and so I was also in the era in which the Beatles were breaking into the mainstream, and so rock and roll was very popular, and I grew up also learning jazz and classical and many aspects. And so one of the styles that I loved a lot was a piano style that was more of a gospel swing. And my parish at the time needed a piece of music that was going to be used for confirmation. That ergo the imagery of rain, which is the waters of baptism, God loving everyone like the water that covers the earth. There's an imagery that I had heard in the scripture, and so I thought this would be perfect, and to use the rain as an aspect that covers everywhere and with no exception. So the love of God covering everyone in this manner. So I used the imagery of rain. Some of the influence on that piece, there's influence from Phil Collins and influence from Elton John. So it's a little bit of everything in gospel music. So there's a lot of different things in that element of rain down. So I just kind of wrote the piece thinking about the imagery of rain coming down. If you are familiar with the melody is coming down, raining down. The melody comes down. So there's what they call in music word painting. Word painting uses the melody reflects what the text is saying. And for some reason, between that and the repetition and the simple notes and the simple rhythm and some of the chords that are used in that, became a magical combination that has become very accessible for people, and a lot of people in the world like this piece. They love Rain Down. I can't explain it exactly why that piece struck a chord on everybody, but it's one of the wonderful accidents that happen when you're creating music. So Rain Down is something that's much loved by everybody.
Tell us about how you create as an artist. Some people it comes like we talk about rain down, it just rains down for a certain series of time, and everything out of you is just flowing out, and you have all this writing just coming out, and all of a sudden you hit a wall. Nothing comes out. You cannot write a song to save your life. Kind of tell us about that experience as a composer. Do you have those moments, and how do you overcome those? Do you collaborate with someone else to try to get that back?
Yeah, That's actually, that's an excellent question too. I can tell you certainly most artists have hit a time when they are not productive. And I've been there many times. Sometimes it's just life, some things that you are doing. There are other things. I'm also a husband and a parent and a teacher. And sometimes those things happen that you become so involved in other aspects of your life that all of a sudden you blink and it's 8 months later and you haven't written anything. That's not impossible to experience. But what it is as an artist, you heighten some senses. There is something within you that always is watching carefully, listening carefully. I spend a lot of time capturing lines in conversation, sometimes even with a little pad, and you write down what people say, and so you pay attention. I'm very close attention to the scriptures when they are being proclaimed. Sometimes, since I am a music director at a church also, I have to do research and read scriptures ahead of time that are going to be proclaimed late in later weeks. And all those things bring me back sometimes to the mental and the spiritual state of mind that will require to become creative. However, sometimes it takes time. You brought up that too, that sometimes I just have to get together with other colleagues. I'm also very blessed that in the company and through the publishing company, through OCP, they have a successful system in which they have to also go out to the national conferences, promote and show their resources available for other musicians. And so I, as a writer of OCP, have to go to those things. And so when I go to teach and show resources, I also have opportunities to talk to other artists and other writers. And so that always brings up creativity. Nothing brings creativity sharper than when you are with colleagues that have not only similar likings, but vocation, calling. And so then we challenge one another in one way or another. Sometimes we work together. We just have to collaborate together. Sometimes we, just by listening to somebody say, this is what I'm working on, you walk away going, oh, brother, I got to get it back to the drawing board. And so nothing is better than to listen to other artists share with you what they're working on. That's a wonderful inspiration. So I have the blessing of having incredible mentors and friends people like Bob Hurd and Rory Cooney come to mind. There are people who I see in national level conferences, but when I sit down with them at a table and break bread with them and I'm having dinner and we're talking about different things, hearing them speak about what they're working on their projects makes me want to run over to my own little corner and start creating.
So those annual conventions really help. So kind of walk you back, kind of be competitive. Is there a particular song that people always ask you to play all the time?
Yeah, I would say if I had to choose between all of them, and what's really funny, most people know me by Rain Down, and if I'm more in the Spanish, because I'm also a minister in the Spanish community, so the Spanish-speaking community know me more by Somos Cristo. So those two pieces, Rain Down, and the bilingual piece that is called Somos el Cuerpo de Cristo would be probably the pieces that most people would ask me to play. Although in the company in OCP, I probably have about 30 plus pieces in one of their Spanish hymnals, in Floricanto, which is a Spanish hymnal, and I have about 7 or 8 pieces in their English hymnal. So I have lots of music that is published and lots of as recordings. I have 6 CDs with the company. However, most people know me by those 2 pieces, Rain Down and Somos el Cuerpo. I cannot skip those when I play concerts around. I have to play.
I'm going to play one of them in a few minutes, and before we talk about the particular song, one thing about artists, performers in one sense, or ministers, I remember talking to Evan Hawkins. I said, how many times is going to take you to go through Oh Happy Day? He said it never stops. I said, how do you get the energy to continue to play a song that everywhere you go, that's all people want to hear over and over? Yeah. You have to have this particular song. How do you deal with that? Because if you go on tour, you're playing this every single day.
Yeah, yes, you do. It becomes sort of automatic. That's a question that lots of artists face. You can see that even some of the major world artists have to play that song that everybody wants to hear. So one way, I've heard healthy reasons from our other artists, and the way I look at it is, look, Rain Down has struck a chord on people's hearts. Also, so in an artist level, you owe it to share that and to bring back that joy. I also, in another aspect, I have been on the other side, on the receiving side. I have been to see artists and composers that I felt were terrific. And everybody can identify with that feeling of, you're going to see James Taylor because you just love Fire and Rain and you want to hear him play. I have been there in that situation where I won't go and see an artist and I want to hear him play that my favorite song. And so I know that they've played that song for 40 years, yet they're still going to play it today because I've been in that receiving end. So in a way, as an artist that is coming to do a showcase of music, in some way, I owe it to that public to provide them with that. And also, let's look at it from a financial standpoint. From a financial standpoint, the folks that are there are paying part of my earnings, part of my living. If I'm making part of my living playing music live, then the folks that are there that have paid money to come and see me, I owe it to them to pay to play the music that they would want to hear. And so there is, that's that aspect too. I have to be in tune with the people who are fans of the music, and I have to be in some way present to their needs and provide them with the expectation that they have.
So how do you keep the song fresh every single time?
Different ways. Sometimes the nice thing is I can make it a little bit more improvisational if you're talking about Rain Down particularly, when I'm doing it live, I do different things. I have had an opportunity to insert electric guitar solos on it, or sometimes piano solos. Sometimes we break into allowing the audience to sing it. So sometimes I've done that where I break into verse 3, and if we're playing in a church setting, they can pick up the hymnal books, and so I can say, okay, you're gonna do verse 3 on your own, and we kind of bring the music down, and it's just drums, and everybody sings it up. So those are cool ways of kind of keeping it different and fresh for me. Sometimes I let the audience sing it. Sometimes it's a piano solo. Sometimes it's an organ solo. Sometimes it's an electric guitar solo, and that makes it a little bit more interesting for me when I'm having to play it over and over.
Tell us about Smo, We Are the Body of Christ. Kind of tell us how that song came to be.
Sure. So much the We Are the Body of Christ was, the inspiration was, once again, sharing ideas with composer Bob Hurd and talking about communities that had Spanish-speaking people and English-speaking people in one place, and how to provide them with something that they could use to worship together. It's very easy. Everybody has music in English, everybody has music in Spanish, but what happens when you have one ritual, one celebration, Thanksgiving, or it's 4th of July, whatever, and you have everybody together? And there are, at the time, this was in the early 90s, there was not a lot of material available for that. And I wanted to provide a piece that would be 50-50, 50% English, 50% Spanish, with somewhat of a translation, maybe not literal, but very close in the sense of just saying, okay, here's a piece of music in which we are both equal. We divide this in half, and we have some Spanish and some English, and we both sing it, and making it accessible. When we come to the verses, all people have to say is so and sing We Are the Body of Christ. Those two lines, the cantor, the soloist, sings the rest of the complicated lyric. But that way, it was an experiment of trying to create a song that would give equal time to both languages. And it was successful. It was a happy, upbeat song, and it became one of those anthems for folks that share this kind of life in their parish, which is the life of the multicultural, or the life of the bilingual culture, the English-speaking and Spanish-speaking folks. And so it became very successful for that. So successful, that when Bob Hurd and I got together to create a collection of music that was going to be of bilingual pieces for communities that had these two languages in their midst, we decided to call the collection Somos el Cuerpo de Cristo, We Are the Body of Christ. It was the perfect song for that. So we was very lucky.
Okay. We're going to take a break real quick and be back in a moment, and we're going to dive into your two recent projects from Advent and also the Sacraments. Be back in a moment with Jaime Cortez.
You're listening to the Core Business Show, sponsored by Apple Capital Group. Apple Capital Group in Jacksonville, Florida, is a commercial lender that specializes in asset-based loans, equipment leasing and financing, invoice financing, commercial real estate loans, and asset-based financing in the U.S. and Canada. Apple Capital Group is a direct lender that lends on their private equity investment portfolio. 90% of most loans are decided within 2 hours, and vendor funding within 24 hours after documents are completed, with a one-page application. No slow no's, just a quick decision and a fast yes. To get more information about lending from Apple Capital Group, call 866-611-7457. That's 866-611-7457 to speak with one of our loan specialists. Or visit us right now at applecapitalgroup.com. Welcome back to the core. Once again, here's Tim Jacquet.
Well, we'll be back with Jaime Cortez, and we're going to talk about your recent project for Advent. Kind of tell us about how this project came to be and some of the titles that make this put this collection together.
Okay. Good to be with you, Tim. Thanks a lot for having me, by the way. This collection, Advent, Viento, it's called as Viento, which is the word for Advent in Spanish, was aimed at a couple of levels. One of them was I wanted music for young people. In a lot of the liturgies where the young people were celebrating with maybe perhaps a little bit more upbeat music. And also I wanted to experiment on creating some, in English, in the English world, there are some really brilliant pieces of music that have been already created that are using the scriptural text of Advent, which are very unique and they're really unique to the season and they're just beautiful. So I wanted to create some songs mainly in Spanish, some in bilingual form, that would have those same scriptures that I could not see in the Spanish repertoire. So the task was to create upbeat, maybe youth-oriented music that was about the Advent scriptures, some in Spanish and some in bilingual form. But there are a lot of things happening. The magical thing about that collection, Adviento, is that I was a little bit more mature as a writer. I was influenced by other things and other people. I had decided that by that time I had hit a wall in terms of the ability to be a good recorder. But somebody who comes to the studio and actually produces your record, who makes decisions on the equipment, on the players, on what kind of gear you're going to use post-production and all that. And I had already hit the limit of what I could do. And so I decided to ask a friend of mine, his name is Andy Andino. He lives in Cleveland, Ohio, and he helped me produce this record. And he has enormous creativity in the studio as a person who records. So that gave this CD great brightness and a really clean, really upbeat sound that I couldn't give it. And so the combination of fresh, young writing with beautiful scripture reading and a great production from a good producer created a wonderful collection. This album actually won a Unity Award as the best Spanish album of the year for, I want to say 2008, I think. So I don't remember what year, but it's just a very beautiful album with a lot of upbeat music and happy songs and I wanted to do something that will be for young people during the Advent.
Okay. And so it's more geared toward the young kind of youth than versus the traditional?
Yeah. The happy thing about it is that once the songs are created, then other people look at it too and go, wow, we can use this too at the 8 o'clock mass. So the thing is that some of the music ended up it ended up going everywhere. So the music was originally geared toward the young people, but people use it in all kinds of masses. So it really hasn't stayed only for the young people, which is a really great blessing, really.
Well, kind of tell us about your journey with bilingual music. Kind of tell us where we are as a country in our music ministries with bilingual liturgies as a whole.
Okay. I think there's a positive outlook in the sense that their catechesis has happened. I think that understanding bilingual music and multicultural music is really first having to understand who you are as a person in general, as an individual, who we are as a community, and what is the value of stepping into somebody else's world. In the spirituality that we have accepted as Catholics, we are called to welcome the stranger. We are called to help those who are, in need. And so when we're talking about people who are coming to a land that maybe they have a different language and they are maybe scared, or maybe they're trying to develop their own and keep their own identity, we as Catholics are called to reach out and help out and to embrace and to welcome people. And so with having said that, if you have accepted those responsibilities as a Catholic, then it's much easier and simpler to adapt other cultural aspects that are foreign to you. However, you can see this by how the country speaks right now about people who are coming from foreign lands to our country, how this is not exactly something that we all share, whether it's by fear or by other aspects. We sometimes do have resistance to embracing people who are different than we are. And this is not the forum for that. But I know that in terms of bilingual music, I think that when you need a certain level of catechesis to understand why do we do other languages, because the church is much wider than just the 9 o'clock mass or this particular parish or this particular city. The church is much more universal. And so, in terms of my personal experience, I try to expose my community not only to Spanish and English, but to many languages. We have little acclamations and pieces of music that are in Vietnamese, and we have pieces of music in Tagalog. And so we have done music from different languages, and that exposes people to to different cultures and to understand that our church is much wider. I have had to lead music that I have had to spend hours learning first because I don't understand Vietnamese, for example, but I've had to lead music in Vietnamese before. And so I also I wanted to put myself in the place of the person who says, well, I don't understand this. Well, I have been there. I know that I don't understand exactly what I'm saying in Vietnamese, but I do know that this is praising God in one way, and I want to honor and welcome, stretch a hand of welcoming to the community that is there, present, that is Vietnamese. And I would like to, and this is one way of reaching out and welcoming them. So catechesis needs to happen before we are more comfortable with singing different languages. Having said that, you don't have to look too far to see that Spanish-speaking communities are growing everywhere in this country. And so in that sense, there is a need in the church, in the life of the church and the life of the parishes, for music that shares both of these languages, because there's going to be many times in the year where we're going to have to be together, we're going to have to worship together. And so in that sense, there is still a need for that kind of music. Whether people always want to accept it or not, it's a different issue. But in reality, we get calls about OCP all the time, and music directors going, oh, I'm having this ordination and we're going to have everybody here, and we have English and Spanish, and we'd like to have some piece of music that can say this and this in both languages. Do you have that? So we are constantly getting calls from people having the need in specific moments in their ritual in which they need languages, music in English and in Spanish, or sometimes maybe even more languages. I just heard recently that one of our great composers, Father Ricky Manalo, has composed a piece of music in 30 languages. It's a little short piece, but he wanted to prove a point, I'm sure, with that. And it's a wonderful point, which is the church is very wide. So here we are honoring all these cultures. So bilingual music is, the intention, when I write music that is bilingual, the intention is to reach out and include another group that may feel outside. And so the intention of bilingual music is solely to include more people and to reach out and welcome other people, to reach out and welcome the stranger. That's what we want to do. We don't want to make other people feel excluded and go, oh, why are we doing this? The sole intention is to include more people who are part of the church and to reach out and welcome them and to share their experience of spirituality and to share their culture just through a tiny little bit of language. That's the intention.
When it comes to bilingual and multicultural, can I tell us what the difference between the two? Are they the same in one, in your opinion, or they separate?
Well, bilingual is a Latin term. It just means two languages. So when you're talking about bilingual music, you're talking about normally, in general, Spanish and English. Not necessarily that way. Okay. But it just means two languages. But in our country, most of the time, we're talking about English and Spanish, even though it could be French and Spanish, it could be anything. But bilingual is for two languages. Most of the repertoire that we have at OCP is Spanish and English, so that's a bilingual piece. But when you're talking about a multicultural piece, it's a different level. You could have more than two languages in that, and I know that there are many. I can think of, at least off the top of my head, Jesse Manabusen, a wonderful writer from the Catholic Church, who is an OCP writer also. He has written a beautiful piece that is a song of thanksgiving. It is actually called Thank You, and I think it's Malo, which is the language that he used there, which I want to say it's, if my memory fails me, I think it's Chamorro, but I can't remember. But anyways, that in that piece, he has used like 13 languages to say thanks be to God. And so that's a multicultural piece, more than one culture, more than two cultures. Sometimes a multicultural piece would be just the style in which it's executed. It could be that it could be in a certain style. There are pieces of music that are written in huayno, which is a South American rhythm, or in merengue, or in cumbia, which in Spanish music, there's a lot of specific rhythms, and they really have specific ways of executing them. And so you have mariachi music. And so all those things are aspects of also culture. So a multicultural piece of music could be considered to be something that has got maybe two languages, but yet is in a specific style.
Okay. Tell us about your sacraments, new CD on sacramentos.
Okay. Sacramentos is really the intention of that piece, of that collection, was to provide resources about the sacrament. So in terms of talking about the sacraments, we're talking about baptism, you're talking about first communion, confirmation, weddings, funeral. And so in those aspects of the church, the sacramental moment, I wanted to provide some music that was bilingual. And there's actually a couple of stories about that. I was serving a parish in Mesa, Arizona, which is where I live. And I had a gentleman come and say, my father passed away. And in Arizona, we're so close to Mexico. So he said, my father passed away. He was from Mexico, and much of my family is coming from Mexico. And I want to know if you have some funeral music that could be in English and in Spanish. And because my tias are coming, my primos and all that. So I was like, wow, okay, well, and at the time, this was in the early 90s, I remember just mustering some sort of an answer like, don't worry, I'll find something. But I really, specifically for the funeral rite, I didn't recall having anything bilingual at the time. And so I remember keeping that. Well, not 3 or 4 days later, a young lady comes and says, I'm getting married. My family is from Mexico, and my tios and my tias are all coming to the wedding. Do you have any music that is bilingual, English and Spanish, for a wedding? Well, I mean, the alarm was in my head was ringing loud, right? I was thinking, well, here's a need. In the sacramental moments of the church, we are going to need some music that will, when we are uniting, here's an interesting moment in which our country is going through a lot of people are marrying in mixed races, and they're marrying different people from different cultures. And so here's a need in which we're going to need music for the sacrament that are going to be in English. So that gave me the focus, and I just started doing research with all the sacramental books, taking texts from that, and doing research on different rituals, and I started developing this collection. It was bilingual music for the sacrament.
Wow. Kind of tell us, to close with, what is your parish life is like? How do you go about picking your music throughout the year? What challenges you have as a director as the community changes and music changes? How do you actually address those needs in your particular parish?
That's the essential thing in any parish is the leadership. I am blessed that I have a pastor. I'm my parish is Holy Cross Church in Mesa, Arizona. My pastor is Father Richard Felt. Father Felt has got an amazing vision, a wonderful vision of Vatican II, in which the gifts of the community are important and they're welcome. He has a wonderful vision about understanding that people come from different cultures, that we are in Arizona, and that the Hispanic community is growing leaps and bounds, and that there are people who are coming to our parish to worship, and they have needs in their language. And so he is an incredible visionary. And in that sense, when the leadership of my parish is saying to me, welcome the stranger, welcome the Hispanic community, try multicultural music, help people understand that we are bigger than just one mass, then we're talking about, it paves the road for me. All I have to do really is to be a good teacher, to be patient, because the one thing that I have learned when we are teaching multicultural music and bilingual music is you must be patient. You must understand that sometimes you're going to have a reaction. People get scared when they have to step into different languages. Some people are very delighted about speaking another language, but some people are not. And so I have to be patient. I have to be compassionate. I have to be very good at giving good reasons. I write an article in the bulletin every week, and sometimes I'll touch in the aspect of why do we do different languages? Why do we do this? And so catechizing people is very important. Letting them in on the train of thought that the parish went through, that the staff went through, to say, this is why we are doing this. Not just to say, we're going to sing the song in Spanish, let's try. But to actually say, we have had right now we are having a big class of people who are preparing for confirmation, and you would be surprised to hear that out of that group of kids that are preparing for confirmation, 65% of them are in Spanish families, Spanish-speaking families. So because of that, we have chosen this piece of music that has two languages. Let me show you a little bit of how it goes, and I'll translate it for you. So we give people a chance to understand and catechize them about why we are doing this. And it's not just a whim, or it's not because I know Spanish that we're singing in Spanish. It's because our community is growing in bigger aspects and with people who are not speaking necessarily in English. And so the vision of the leadership, my pastor gives me the vision and points in that direction, and he really appreciates the gifts of the community. He wants to include everybody, and he understands perfectly that some of that will include different cultures. And so then from there, I take it from there and do my research, do my catechesis, write on the bulletin, when I'm teaching and practicing during church before Mass starts, I am very careful about being clear about what I need to say to make folks understand why we're doing this. Make it with a joyful statement. I'm not doing negative statements, but in a joyful way, saying this is going to be beautiful because, this is going to be wonderful because, and that the catechesis and the vision of the pastor can really make a big difference of why, how we can be successful at singing music that is in different languages.
Anything you'd like to leave us with? And we're almost out of time. We're going to play one of your tracks to close out. What would you like to leave us with about Jaime Cortez?
Well, you know that we are ministers of the church, like all the ministers that are out there. I also sit at a desk and have to do the scripture readings, and I have to do research about songs. I have to practice with choirs. I have a children's choir. I have multicultural events. I have a Thanksgiving Mass that is in many languages. I also walk that walk of the music minister, the music leader of the church. I feel the responsibility that through music, help deepen the faith of a community. I feel that big responsibility. So you want to remember anything is musicians of the church, love what you do. Take your vocation, take your calling, and treat it with love and great respect. Treat your communities with respect. Treat your musicians and your singers with great respect, because that shows also the aspect that, as musicians, we are also called to be followers of Christ. That's what we do. In our realm, we are really basically about Christ. So love what you do, follow Christ, be Christ-like in what you do, because that will be essential for the success of bringing love into the world and salvation into the world. That's what we're about. I can be a great musician, but if I'm not Christ-like, I'm not doing my job. I'm not doing the mission of Christ, which is what we do.
Wow. Well said. Jaime, thank you so much for coming on the program and sharing your story. And they can go to OCP website and find all of your materials and everything listed there.
That's right. Thanks, Tim, for having me over. And greetings to everybody.
Oh. And everybody just drop at his church and say hello to him. You're in Holy Cross in Arizona, right?
Mesa, Arizona.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on the program.
Thanks, Tim. Cheers to everybody. Bye-bye.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye. Again, that was Jaime Cortez. We're going to play a song, El Cristo. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. I got to work on my Spanish. I only had like a couple of weeks. So anyway, I'm going to play this track as we go out. And thank you for listening to the Core Business Show. Tim Jacquet, your host.
Thank you for listening to the Core Business Show with Tim Jacquet. For a free quote on equipment leasing and financing, visit our website, applecapitalgroup.com. That's applecapitalgroup.com. And fill out the information to receive your free quote. We hope you'll join us for our next episode. And remember, you can always get to the Core via iTunes. You'll find all our previous episodes there. Thanks again for listening to the Core Business Show with Tim Jacquet.